Hello, everybody. Today we have a speaker, Henry Andrews, who's going to be telling us about the emergent cyclical theory behind spiral dynamics. And we're very excited to hear about this because there is a whole background that came before spiral dynamics that's quite interesting based on Clare Graves' research. So with that, I'm going to let Henry take over. Henry?
So this talk is about the emergent cyclical theory behind spiral dynamics. So this is about basically the way that Clare Graves, who was a professor at Union College, first constructed the theory and kind of the way that he presented it and emphasized it, which is a little bit different than how Don Beck and Chris Cohen decided to emphasize things in their spiral dynamics book. Okay, so the agenda here, we'll talk about the construction of the theory. We will talk about the dynamics in the theory, which are kind of the main focus of Graves. We will talk about what Graves called the 6/6 hypothesis, which became the tiers in spiral dynamics. We will talk about the conditions for change, which are often overlooked by folks who are only casually familiar with either EC theory or spiral dynamics. We will then take a look at change and the second tier, and a brief comparison with derived works and how that fits in. So let's start with the name of this thing. Naming is hard. Graves seemed to like to be very descriptive in his names. So he used names like emergent, cyclical, phenomenological, existential, double helix, levels of existence, conception of adult human behavior in 1978. He had trimmed that down a little bit by 1981, but it's still pretty long. He didn't really settle on any one thing during his lifetime. In his book, The Never-Ending Quest, which is the posthumously published main work of his, he often abbreviates things as EC for emergent cyclical and talks about the emergent cyclical theory and the emergent cyclical conception. I use that for the theoretical framework that describes how everything works. And then there's levels of existence, which is another common term in his various names. And that's for the levels that are produced by the theory. And it's important to realize that Graves considered the levels an artifact of the theory rather than the primary focus, which if you read The Never-Ending Quest, there are three sections. There's a section on how he built it at the front, and then there's a section on kind of comparing it to other work and looking at the implications in the back. And those sections were in fairly final form when Graves abandoned the manuscript due to poor health. The section in the middle is about the theories, about the levels themselves, and it's basically cobbled together by the editors from a whole bunch of different sources because Graves just kind of put that part off because the other two were much more important to him. So if you put these together, you get this somewhat pronounceable acronym ECLET for Emergent Cyclical Levels of Existence Theory, and you'll see that, and sometimes I use that for the overall concept. So let's look at how the theory was constructed. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's helpful to have a bit of a background here. So this was initially developed from experimental data starting in the 1950s. There was no theory hypothesis beforehand, and many of the things that Graves found while he carried out his observations and experiment were very unexpected to him. He continued with further experiments and observation and refinements in the 60s and into the 70s. He tended to focus on learning styles and managerial techniques because he found some applied psychology outlets more interested in his work than the more theoretical academic journals. And he was also interested in the neurological basis for the activation from level to level. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but Graves really believed that the different levels corresponded to different regions of the brain or sets of cells or some very, very concrete biological basis. And for some levels, he had some things that you could measure that tended to support that, but others, it really wasn't clear at all. And I think it's a very interesting aspect of his research that could use attention from someone qualified in that field. Uh, because yeah, I don't believe anyone's ever followed up on it all that much. So the way this started was with Graves asking his students for essays on the mature human in his normal psychology class. Um, so the initial period for this was 1952 to 1959. This gave him enough data for the first public paper that he put out, but continued to develop and refine the theory. So there was the three-step process here of the students being given minimal direction um, and having to just write out this essay on what did they think the mature human was like. And then they would be put into groups and discuss it with each other, and they would have to either defend or revise their conception. And then there would be part of the class devoted to the current research and what various authorities in the field had to say, and they had to either defend or revise it again after that. For the time, this had fairly diverse participants. It was not just his daytime psychology class, which was all men and probably mostly white men. Um, he also included the women's classes from a graduate program, and he included night school classes, which got a different section of type of people who were generally working full time and taking additional classes. So there's this concept called grounded theory, which was not a formal concept when Graves was doing this work, but later got developed. And what Graves did is somewhat like grounded theory, although less formal. And what that means is that he didn't have a hypothesis. He had all of this data, and he looked for the patterns in the data and built the theory based on what he found. So he took these initial essays and the post-peer revision essays and the post-research revision essays, and he recruited a new set of independent judges either every year, every semester or every year, I'm not entirely sure. And each time he would give them all of the essays that were available up to that point. And he told them, classify these things like to like, and don't force anything into a category if it doesn't go. And he made sure that they knew that the categorizations had to be unanimous. And if you couldn't agree, then just put it in the non-categorized thing. So that produced the level classification, and based on how people change things from each of the revision steps, it produced the change sequence. So after that, a lot of his students then continued to other classes of his, so he could continue to observe them after having done all of this data collection in one semester. So he would group people who had shown up in the same classification into the same working group and observe them. He would give them standard psychology tests. I believe he had an abnormal psychology class. So in the guise of you should learn about all of these things that you can test for, he just had the students do the tests and observe them based on that. And he would sometimes interview specific students just to get additional information. And finally, he added some anthropology research because he realized that a huge swath of the human population is not taking any sort of college classes. And therefore he needed to cover these sorts of cultures. And he did that not through field work, but through research. Let's see. Yeah, so this kind of puts EC theory into this awkward science versus philosophy concept. And part of this is because after Graves suffered a brain injury of some sort, due to surgery. He abandoned his work. Don Beck and Chris Cohen kind of convinced him to help them sort it out and continue the work. But somewhere in there, he decided to just throw out all of his original data, which means that, okay, great, there was this great scientific data collection and classification scheme that happened. And according to Graves, like the judges always came up with the same classifications, which was not expected at all. Like usually with this kind of fuzzy data, you get a much more variance in how people would classify something as free form as an essay. But there was definitely a lot of interpretation and narrative construction that went into kind of telling the story of how all of this works. And we don't have very much information on how much of that there was versus how much was really kind of formally observable by going through and marking up the essays. So it's impossible to go back and say, yes, given these essays and these, this classification from the people who did the judges, would anyone else have come up with the same theory? So this I think is one of the major reasons why there's not a ton of mainstream acceptance of Graves's work. He didn't publish a whole lot during his lifetime. He did publish at least one peer-reviewed article, but it was all very much outlines. So he didn't publish the data. He did publish some of the measurements, saying, kind of how, for example, intelligence stays the same across most of the levels, but complexity goes up as the levels go up. And dogmatism goes down. And then there's some that alternate back and forth. So he published some of that, but he never actually published the full set of data and exactly how he turned all of that data into this theory. So that means it's pretty susceptible to people poking at like, well, what about this? Yeah, and it can't of course, because this was many years of data collection, it can't really easily be replicated. So with all that in mind, let's look at the dynamics of EC theory, because as I said, Graves really cared about how the theory worked, and then the levels that got produced were important, of course, but they were artifacts of that. So what are the components of this? So there are the existential problems that humanity has to solve, and in spiral dynamics, these are the life conditions. There are the conditions for change, which are very important, and as I mentioned before, often overlooked by people who are casually learning the theory. I know it took me a while before I got around to paying as much attention to these as they deserve. Spiral dynamics expands on these substantially because it is focused on how to practically affect change in organizations. And then there are the neurological coping systems, which are expressive or conforming. And I kind of use this pink and blue coloring throughout the presentation to indicate those. And those correspond to the warm and cool spiral dynamics colors. And these coping systems in spiral dynamics are the V-memes. Spiral dynamics did, by pulling in the concept of a meme and V-memes as these kind of mimetic attractors, definitely added some really useful language around how to talk about what is going on with these systems that was not present in the original formulation. So that's something that I think spiral dynamics really added, that and the conditions for change, expanding on those. So what does this mean, emergent and cyclical? Because these are the two words out of those giant long names that got extracted into the short name. So clearly they're important. So what we have here is the existential problems driving the emergence of the neurological coping systems. So those existential problems can be physical challenge to survival or social challenges within society. Whatever it is that need to be solved, these things cause new behaviors and systems to emerge in our brains, in our behaviors. The neurological coping systems cycle orientation. So there's the I express myself to change the environment, looking outwards as an individualistic approach, or how Graves phrased it, I sacrifice self to conform to the environment, which is an inward-looking, collective-oriented approach. So wait, sacrifice self? This is a phrase that I find turns off a lot of people. And I think it is a very ER or orange frame in spiral dynamics terms, where it's a very individualistic frame where any constraint on the individuality is viewed as a negative thing. So it's a sacrifice that you have to give up something. I think of those stages as more about attending to relationships. Because the individualistic approach is not a universal cultural thing. A lot of cultures would not see this as necessarily a sacrifice. It would be something that fits more into the way they view life in general. So I like to frame it positively, and in that sense, it is very much about attending to relationships more than it is about expressing the self. I have never come up with a great term that I like for this. Gray is sometimes used adjust self instead of sacrifice self. So I use that a lot. I also use conform self or conforming. Again, I'm not quite happy with either of them. But Gray's most often use sacrifice self. So why should we pay attention to this express versus conform thing? It is definitely more abstract than the primary descriptions given in the 1996 Spiral Dynamics book. The express and sacrifice things are mentioned in the Spiral Dynamics book as well, but they're not as front and center. But they are also more fundamental. And as we'll see, I think it's easier to see the first versus second tier analogies. We'll see if that is actually the case by the end of this. I can't see all of the chats, so if anything is really oh, okay, now I can see it. ER, it's equivalent to orange. You'll see that in a moment. So I don't know if I should really respond to all of the chat things. I will try to check in on that between each section. So let's take a look at green in spiral dynamics. So this, I just copied this from like the front little section of the bit on green in the Spiral Dynamics book. This is the exact bullet list, except the peace and love for all at the end was from another paragraph. But it's got this human bond name to give it this kind of snappy term. It's the relativistic V-meme. Explore the inner beings of self and others. Share a society, promote a sense of community and unity. Share a society's resources among all. Liberate humans from greed and dogma, reach decisions through consensus, refresh spirituality and bring harmony, and peace and love for all. This this is very warm and fuzzy and very nice. But let's see. These are basically things that happen as a result of the underlying dynamics. It's a list of very important examples, but this is sort of an example of behaviors that tend to arise. And if you actually do read through the entire chapter, it starts talking a bit about the downsides, the things that would later be called the mean green meme, which we will eventually touch on. And it's not all this warm fuzzy stuff, but the emphasis is really on that. So in EC theory, the primary way this is phrased is sacrifice now in order to get acceptance now. And Graves had various ways of framing this. So blue was sacrifice now in order to be rewarded, in the afterlife or in the future. So that's kind of the contrast that's set up here. An alternate theory formulation that Graves used is sacrifice now in order for all to get now instead of just yourself. But it's worth noting that all is not necessarily truly global in practice. There may be an all that you care about and people outside of that group. So what's important here is that the really fundamental dynamic is looking to peers for that acceptance. Like this is why these are in terms of relations versus sacrifice. Like these are the relationships that you are attending to in green. You're looking to your peers. That is prioritized over the experts that were present in orange, which is ER. I will actually explain the lettering. and or the relationships with authorities, which are in DQ, which is blue. So that means that your values can seem malleable as your peer group shifts, as people bring up new ideas or new people, are added to your group of peers. Uh, but there's a solid core around which all of this shifts. So it's not Graves specifically mentioned this idea of there being a core underneath this shifting group. So it's not entirely that, as some people claim, that there is no notion of truth, there is no solid anything, everything is so relative, there is nothing to hold on to. It's like, no, there is something under there, but it is true that there is this shifting thing on top as the discussion goes amongst your peer group. And I'm using peer in a very broad sense, so not just your actual literal friends and the peers in your direct life, but also, whoever else on the internet that you associate with through an interest group or an identity group or whatever else it is that causes you to think this is a person whose opinion I care about versus these other people whose opinions I don't care about. So the spiral dynamics examples do fit this dynamic because things like warm and fuzzy consensus and resource sharing and equity all fit into this because you care about your peers, so you want to get consensus among them. You care about your peers, so you want everybody to have appropriate amounts of resources. But other things fit in here as well that aren't necessarily the first things that you associate with that list of examples of green from the spiral dynamics book. So there is deconstructing anything that's in the way of this, which does show up in the chapter, as I mentioned, and does get emphasized in some other formulations in terms of this being postmodernism. Of course, Wilbur likes to talk about that a lot. But another thing that shows in here is anti-elitism. Do your research, and this is something that can really lead into conspiracy theories, as I think we have all seen in recent years. And also like the choice of truth by de facto social consensus. So here we see that, okay, yeah, it's malleable around the core, but that core, what that core is depends a lot on how you choose your peer group. And that's something, in current US politics, we kind of have these large scale social groups that are almost completely disjoint in terms of who they consider people worth paying attention to. So this starts to explain the uh, the difficult dynamics that show up from green in a way that doesn't just fall back into, oh, we're just going to critique liberalism and progressivism because that's where all these kind of fuzzy equal rights movements and whatnot come out of. Yeah, that is a major part of green, and it can definitely be taken too far in terms of what you're willing to tear down in order to solve things. Although what too far is definitely depends on your perspective. But we can also look at this other frame and see that things that don't fit into this warm and fuzzy thing, but are also doing similar sorts of deconstruction that might take a group view in a completely different direction than the sort of traditional equal rights groups that we think of as being part of green. And those flow from that same choice of peer group and looking to acceptance from peer group and relying on the peer group for what you think is true. So let's look at the cyclic aspect here. This is one of several diagrams that Graves used that he referred to a number of times. And I think it's a very important one. So you have, Graves actually drew this as two separate lines tracing how the two different types of systems arose. So the express self system, which again is in this kind of pink for the warm SD colors, and the sacrifice system for the cool side colors, individual conforming to environment. Here we have the letters. What those mean are the existential problems or life conditions were assigned letters starting at A, and for the initial 8 systems, that takes us up through H. And the neurological coping systems were assigned letters starting with N. And then that takes us up through U. And then if you have your problems and your coping system matched, then you get the letter pairs AN, BO, CP, etc. So AN being beige in spiral dynamics, BO being purple, etc., etc. What you see here is as you go from left to right, first you hit a new existential problem, and that causes one or the other of the sets of coping systems to move up to a new level. So you hit the A problems and you get the N coping systems, but then you hit the B problems, and the express self system now goes into the background while the sacrifice self system or the relation oriented system surges up, and that is it activates the O system. So now you're in BO, which would be purple. And then you encounter the C problems, and that causes the express self system to rise up again, and now the sacrifice self system is in the background. So now you have the CP level, which would be red in spiral dynamics. So this keeps going, and the increase in the size in here is intended to indicate that the complexity of the problems and the solutions that can be produced by the coping system increases with each iteration through this process. So this really, to me, emphasizes that you've got these express and sacrifice dynamics, and what you should look at is what are you expressing and what are you sacrificing to. I'm putting that transition in. Okay, so let's look at that. I didn't mean to slow down those transitions, but oh well. Okay, so somewhere I got these one-word descriptions of the existential problems, and I don't actually remember where they came from, but I find them useful, even though they're very much summaries. But they are fundamentally the same problems that you see in spiral dynamics. There's nothing really fundamentally different there. So first off, we have the basic problems of survival, and for that we are expressing ourselves to resolve physical tensions. It's not a whole lot of expression. It's basically eating and sleeping and that kind of thing. From there, once you can survive, then now you want a longer term safety, because this survival is very much your like daily periodic things that you're living moment to moment. And if you've got that down, then you would like to have some protection, and that leads to people grouping together in tribes for safety. And in that level, you are conforming yourself to tradition and elders. That is the knowledge of how to live safely and support each other that has been built up slowly. Once you have safety, that is a long-lasting, stable point. But if at some point tradition starts to fail you, and that can happen because tradition doesn't change fast and conditions might change fast, then you start to have individuals reacting to move out of that. And what they tend to look for is significance. So that is about expressing yourself to gain power and recognition and to help with the consequences to others. You are looking to build up your own self and be remembered and accomplish things in that sense. This produces a relatively chaotic system where people hold on to power by whatever mechanisms they have, and then they lose it and things change around. You have to find your new pecking order. So eventually people want order. That's the next set of existential problems. And this happens by conforming yourself to the respected authority, whether that's a sacred scripture, a set of laws, and then the people who are enforcing that, such as the leaders, the Lord, the king, the clergy, whoever it is. Once you are protected from chaos and you have order, then at some point people start looking around and saying, you know, I would actually like to have more in life and not just the people who are at the top of the hierarchy. So now you're expressing yourself to seek truth and wealth. And this is a more calculated expression because you don't want to gain things and then attract so much attention you get torn down, which could happen in the CP system because it was so unrestrained. So now this is a bit more calculated. And you're seeking things, you're seeking to maximize things. Yeah, prosperity, also truth that brings prestige, so seeking science and that kind of thing. Then uh, once you have prosperity, you have room to start thinking about community. And I'm going to come back to this dynamic about, well, why do you suddenly start thinking about these things? What is it that activates that? So now this is why you start looking to your extended peer group, because now you are you want to establish those bonds and you want to prioritize those, which you can do because you have all the resources that let you pay more attention to other people than to yourself. Now, assuming you get that, you have, then there are problems related to interdependence and the fact that things globally are pretty out of whack. And you are expressing yourself to support all life. Graves phrased this one very interestingly because it is expressing self not at the expense of others and expressing self to support not only your own life, but to support all life with a strong view towards interdependence of all things. And finally, for now, there are problems that are most likely about sustainability, of keeping things going in the face of a mysterious universe that you don't entirely understand because you have kind of hit the limits of the understanding that you've developed so far. And we're going to come back to these last two and go through them in detail. And of course, it keeps on going. There will be yet another thing that we don't know yet, and more things that emerge in response to that. So here, I find particularly with the conform self things, going back to looking at who are you conforming to and what does that imply? A lot of the behaviors will follow on from looking at that dynamic. So let's talk about what Graves called the 6-upon-6 hypothesis. And these became tiers in spiral dynamics. So Graves noticed some suspicious similarities between AN and GT. He didn't notice between any of the other earlier, BO through FS. So AN is beige, GT is yellow. So now this is my way of describing yellow, but AN resolves physical tensions. That's pretty close to Graves's wording. I look at GT as resolving metasystemic tensions of the global tensions in systems. So there's a similarity there. Now the rest of these are pretty close to paraphrasing from Graves. However, Graves never anywhere wrote out, here is why I thought AN and GT were the same. He just kind of mentions it and you have to go dig through all of his different writings and kind of look at like, well, what word did he use here and what word did he use there and how does that connect? So that's why I've picked a bunch of things out and I've kind of massaged the quotes a little bit to make them, to show the similarity a bit more clearly. So in AN, the individual, you sense the necessary information for your survival and for procreation, survival of the species, and you react to that. And that's mostly, bodily signals. In GT, yellow, we are sensing the imbalances across local and global systems that have been left by AN through FS. And Graves writes a lot about how once you get up to, what spiral dynamics calls yellow, you are looking around going like, oh my gosh, what the hell has happened to the world from all these first tier systems? I need to fix this, and I need to do this in a way that is true to me individually. Um, but true to me individually, that shows up in an interesting way where there's a parallel in Grays's writing. So Grays writes that like the only time someone in beige expends effort is in response to that immediate need. Someone in yellow is going to basically be doing the things that they think are necessary and are not really going to be all that interested in doing things that other people think are necessary. So someone working in operating from yellow is going to perform the necessary work and only in the way that they see fit. So they're going to respond to the things that they see as they need them, but they're not going to just do work to fill up the time because somebody said that they need to do work to, you know, to get ahead in life or whatever it is, or to be accepted by their friends. So in beige, there's no excess energy to plan, organize, or foresee the future. But in yellow, so here's a difference, is that it is keeping global impact in mind. Because again, we are looking at all the systems in the person sees and is a part of. And that's why I say meta-systemic. It's not just looking at one system at a time, it's looking at everything. Just as individually in beige, you are responding to all the systems in your body, all the signals. You know, you don't just pay attention to hunger and then forget to sleep. So for a lot of Grays's initial research period, it only got up to GT. And then towards the end, some of the people in GT, when asked to defend or revise their conception in the second and third steps of the research, they moved to something new. And that was very surprising to Grays because he'd kind of correlated yellow with Maslow's self-actualization and thought, well, that seems like a good end state. But it wasn't. It turns out that the people keep going, and there was this new state that confounded him. And he only found 6 people that went to that state. If he found more later, he never wrote about it. So it's very speculative, but he did write some speculation. And he did notice that just as AN and GT share some things, BO and this new system HU share some things. So in BO, which is purple, nature is experienced, but it's not necessarily comprehended. And I don't mean that there's no thought about it and no effort to explain. There is there's the whole idea of animism and people telling stories about nature and assuming that all natural things have spirits in the way that the humans experience things. So you relate to that by having these kind of anthropomorphized spirits in animism. In HU, a fundamental dynamic of HU that Grays found is that people truly realize that we're not going to know a whole lot of things, and they start to accept that, as opposed to the GT thing, which is looking at all the different systems in yellow and being like, okay, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix this, I understand this, let's do all this work. Then you get to a point where you're like, there's a lot of stuff we're just not going to be able to understand, so let's start accepting that. BO is securing your AN level survival through safety and stability of the tribe. Now you don't necessarily have to worry from day to day whether you're going to survive at that level. The collaboration of the tribe, and as long as you follow the elders and you follow the you follow the tradition, that will ensure safety for everyone. HU is about maintaining the balanced systems created by GT. So once yellow puts all of puts the world in something resembling order, now you want to keep that going. And that is sort of a long-term safety and stability theme as well. In BO, we live on the accumulated knowledge of the elders. In HU, we're building on the accumulated knowledge of everyone globally. So it is working with that in a way that accepts what has been built up before and understands that there's a lot of not knowing as well. BO doesn't really have a concept of other ways of life, at least when we're talking about societies that have only gone as far as BO. So there's an automatic and in some sense passive acceptance of the life as they know it. Passive maybe isn't quite the right word because it's more that there isn't they aren't making a choice between this and that. There is no that. HU intentionally chooses what Graves saw as a passive adjustment to this mysterious world. But it is interesting because while it appears to be passive, it is passive. It is a choice to do that. It is a choice to say, I'm not going to understand all of these things and I don't need to. So in purple, there's creation of ritual and tradition to try to get some sort of handle on their existence, even though they aren't going to understand it fully. Whereas in HU, we are automatically accepting all of it. Sorry. So let's look at some of the differences from the first tier, beige and purple, to the second tier, yellow and turquoise, now that we have looked at the similarities between the parallel ones. So beige and purple are driven by personal needs, internal and external. So your need for survival and your need for safety. While yellow and turquoise take action or not based on these observed systemic or metasystemic needs. So that is kind of what is motivating the behavior. Well, yes, let me go on to next thing. So on beige and purple, it is a pretty small world of just your individual self or up to the tribe level. In yellow and turquoise, we are looking at the global metasystemic world. So it's a much larger scale that you're looking at. There's a very strong individual versus collective swing in the first tier. So including beige and purple, but going all the way up through it. In the second tier, that swing is still there, but it's tempered. Graves emphasizes that yellow is about interdependence. And one of the things that yellow is reacting to is excessive individuality, which is interesting because the immediate thing prior to yellow is green, which is a collective. It's a collective system. So yellow is reacting to a much broader thing than just green. And so it understands that it doesn't need to overcorrect all the way back to total individualism. It keeps an eye on the interdependence and accepts certain amounts of constraints on individuality because of that. And on the other hand, conversely, HU is choosing this apparently passive acceptance, but it is doing so with agency. And Graves talks about how people operating from HU aren't likely to be swayed away from their chosen path. They're not going to do things because of necessarily the collective view around them. They're going to take their own interpretation as they adjust to these existential realities that can't necessarily be changed. So my summary of that is, and now I'm drifting a little bit away from things that Graves directly wrote, but I view this as these first tier systems of beige and purple being focused on humans as humans, and the second tier systems of yellow and turquoise being focused on humans as elements within larger systems. And this is a difference about scope and scale and complexity. And as I said, I'm kind of layering some stuff on top of what Graves wrote because he didn't write a ton on this is what I see in these correlations. So this is somewhat what I have pulled out of looking at writings on each of these four systems, and particularly Graves talks about how yellow is looking at a much broader scale and trying to solve all of these problems and fix all of these problems that have been inherited from the first tier. So it's the global scale, it's the species scale, it's the species level survival, or all species, the whole Earth survival. And then in HU, the whole Earth harmonious system that can keep sustaining the gains that were achieved through yellow. So with that idea of scale and complexity, let's think big for a moment and engage in some thought experiment. If a yellow or turquoise social system had a body, if it was just one thing, what would its beige or purple behavior look like? So when you think of it in that sense, you know, AN beige is all about responding to the signals of your body, which is the system in question. So if these higher level social systems had their own body, well, we humans are the cells and organs inside that body that are responding to the higher scale tensions. So when we see that our economic systems have produced are not cannot be sustainable. It doesn't matter whether we're doing unfettered capitalism where the winner takes as much as possible, or whether we're trying to tear that down and redistribute everything perfectly evenly. Neither of those are going to produce the system that is going to fit in with other systems. They both create different sorts of tensions. So we're trying to resolve that and create a more smoothly functioning system. That is us acting as the internals of this metasystemic body. So in that sense, GT is what Graves started calling A prime N prime, right? It is the same pattern repeated at a higher scale. And similarly, if we look at these systems, these higher level bodies as they are and saying, okay, we're going to maintain them as we are, that's analogous to giving them safety and security, which is what the tribe does for individuals at purple. So in this sense, HU is B prime, O prime. It's another analogy where you have a similar dynamic, but it is operating at a larger scale. And I find thinking of these larger scales as their own bodies, as their own entities, helps me see that there's an actual correlation here. There is an odd quote by Graves where he says, go and study the dynamics of an AN beige hunter-gatherer society. And if you apply those to a highly technological GT modern society, then you will get the dynamics of the A prime N prime system. I still have no idea what that means. But clearly clearly he saw behaviors that scaled up in some way to do this correlation. So this is what I have worked out to think about things in that way. So to summarize, Graves saw this potential sixth cycle because AN and A prime N prime are both reactive, and BO and B prime O prime are both accepting, and he built this cycle. And I just realized that I am running out of time, so I'm going to start going faster here. There is this, Graves drew this diagram here, which I find really fascinating. He doesn't explain it in the book at all, but it's very clear that it shows the cycle. And there's two strands, one for the systems and one for the conditions, for the problems. And the upper one is larger than the lower one. And it also goes downwards. And Graves never wrote anything about that. And I don't know if that's just someone drew that and that's just how it looked, or if there was something significant there. I like this a lot better than the spiral dynamics typical spiral, because it feels a lot more intuitive to me about emphasizing that, hey, there's something up here that is an analog of the thing down here, and it's not just this arbitrary cutoff point. So we'll go through the conditions for change, and then I think there's a little bit more after that. But these are very important, and then we will come back and look at how you get up to those yellow and turquoise levels and what that means about where we are right now. Conditions for change. Graves saw 6 conditions for change that all have to be met before you can move up to the next level. So this was the middle gear in that little 3-gear visualization that I had. You get your problems, and now what? So you have to have some potential for change, and that includes openness for change. So in spiral dynamics, it talks a lot about open and closed and arrested, which Graves mentions too. But that's the basic thing there. You need to have solved your current problems. If you haven't solved your current problems at the current level, you're not going to have enough free energy to look ahead. So one example being with orange, you have to have a certain amount of prosperity for yourself. And once you have that security, you can start looking at the green problems of, well, how are other people doing? But if you can't support yourself, then you're not going to have the energy to care about other people. Then you need the feelings of dissonance. Something has to be wrong. It's not working with the current coping system that you have, neurological system that you have. Otherwise, you're not going to be motivated to change anything. You need to have some sort of insight. And this is something that no one else can do for you. You have to figure something out that lets you start changing. And of course, this is where spiral dynamics focuses on things like the gamma trap, right? Where you're still trying all the old things and you haven't had that moment of insight and you're just banging your head against it. And eventually you get the insight and you get the delta surge and you move on to the new thing. I believe Graves mentioned the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, but it wasn't as big of a focus. It was these 6 things that he talked about the most. So then there might need to be removal of barriers. Once the person has the insight, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can act on it. So there might be some things in the way that they need to remove or they might need help removing. And then finally, there needs to be an opportunity to consolidate. If you cannot, if you don't have an opportunity to really settle into this, to how you apply this new insight, it's very fragile and you can slip back out of it very easily. So you need to be able to put it into practice and really start working from it as a common thing if you want to hold on for that and for that to be kind of your new centralized level as opposed to just like, oh, I've kind of got it sometimes. So this cycle is very important. And when people start talking about, oh, I want to get to the next level, or I think everybody needs to get to the next level, we really need to be paying, oh, I forgot. Yes, we must consolidate. You really need to be getting to the next level. What does that really mean? So if you are trying to help someone else get to the next level, or a group get to the next level, only some of these are things that you can really do a whole lot about. You can look at whether they have the solutions that they need to their previous problems. You can see if they need barriers removed, and if they need some space to consolidate things. You can kind of nudge people at the other ones, but they kind of have to decide that things aren't working themselves. They have to find that insight themselves. You can lead them right up to it, but they've got to grab it. So, and just reading about something and saying, I'm going to try to behave this way doesn't work if you haven't actually gone through these things. Now that might help you find the insight, but it's not automatic. The most important thing that I think people don't pay enough attention to, or only give lip service to, is solutions to the current problems. Everybody wants to look ahead to the next thing, but the main thing to pay attention to is, are you done with where you are? And obviously, if you're familiar with spiral dynamics, it's not a sharply divided ladder where you're in exactly one thing at the same time. So this is a fuzzy thing, and you may develop some parts of a stage, whereas you have not developed other parts, and you'll kind of bring things up and gradually get other aspects of your life up to the new stage. So it's not like you have to solve every single problem of the previous stage before you can do anything in the new stage. But in general, you need to have solved your previous problems. So what does that mean for the second tier? Let's go back to the 6/6 diagram that I really like, even though Graves never explained why it's there. So again, it's the scale we have on the bottom, the personal and social scale. On the top, we have the global and species scale. The bottom is what Graves called the surviving cycle, and it has a scarcity mindset for the most part. And that's true whether you're looking at your own survival or whether you're starting to look at the survival of everyone around you. The reason we want to redistribute wealth to take a common green perspective is that we don't think that there's enough for everybody to have enough unless we take some from the people who have a tremendous amount. And given the overbalance of orange, it's probably reasonable, but it's also not necessarily the only way of looking at things. So in the second tier, the being cycle, there is much more of an abundance mindset. And why am I talking about this after going through the conditions of change? That is because in order to get to this being cycle, you have to solve all of these A through F problems so that your survival is ensured. And then you can think about having an abundance mindset. You need to actually have gotten to the point where you are no longer worrying about that scarcity before you can truly move up to the second tier as your primary center. So let's take a deeper look at A prime, N prime, AKA yellow. If you're operating from yellow, then that means you must have solved A through F up to some point. I think most people are aware of Graves's assertion that people operating from yellow have no fear. That doesn't mean that you are literally never afraid of anything, because that would be kind of ridiculous and probably kind of self-destructive. But they have no fear of certain things. And what they really have no fear of are the existential problems that were solved by the first tier. So they're not afraid of not finding food or staying alive. So that's beige. They're not afraid of whether they're going to have long-term shelter and safety. That's purple. They're not afraid of predatory, powerful humans that are going to force them to do whatever else that they don't want to do. So that's red. They're not afraid of punishment by secular or religious authorities. They're not afraid, and in particular, they're not afraid of like things like being damned in the afterlife, right? Because obviously there are still rules that need to be followed and that kind of thing if you have healthy blue. But they're not afraid of this sort of final judgment type of thing. They're not afraid of losing status or prosperity. They've got enough resources. They've got enough respect. That's a solved problem for them. They're not afraid of social disapproval or rejection from green. So Graves quoted some essay or research where the person was saying that, like, well, yes, they do care about whether people like them, but if people don't like them, that's okay. Like, it's not that there's no interest in how people think of you at all. But if you need to go do something that is going to cause people to not think well of you, you're willing to do that. So you're no longer afraid of overall social disapproval and rejection. So I think of this as yellow, A prime, N prime, being based in secure attachment, but like not just to your parents, but to life overall. Like, you feel secure, whatever it is that you need to do to address the A prime life conditions, these global systemic imbalances, are not going to cause first tier problems for you. You have that, so you have the freedom to act on that. So looking at that, A prime existential problems are all around us. I don't think I need to say a whole lot about that. Even if some local systems are balanced quite well, like our global system of systems, the meta system is not. We can, whether that's human-oriented systems or climate, we've got issues. So it's a good thing that the N prime system is oriented towards action. It is often decentralized but interdependent action. So there's a lot of people working in different ways, but conscious of the fact that we are trying to weave this meta system together in a healthy way. And it generates many options for solutions. So that's where the independence and individual aspect of yellow comes in, is that it is generating a whole lot of options, and hopefully some of those options actually solve the problems. So now let's take a deeper look at turquoise, B prime, O prime. So if you're going to reach turquoise, which, a lot of times you get into discussions about spiral dynamics or integral, and it's all like, everybody go to turquoise. you need to have solved all of A through F and to some degree A prime problems. So that means you need that secure attachment to life as a whole. And you also need at least some systems in balance, at least the ones that you are most involved in. Because, and this is not a common condition right now. There may be A prime, in prime, yellow solutions operating out there, but they are aspirational, or they are operating at a smaller scale. Most of us have to deal with systems with imbalances. And that can be, I mean, to give a really mundane example that is not, I'm not talking about changing the V means, but just the idea of the distraction of not being able to keep on something. You know, this week I was dealing with annoying things where I was trying to focus on this presentation and some other projects, but I kept having to deal with random healthcare bureaucratic crap because of, you know, health insurance in America. So this is just sort of a thing where if you're dealing with systems, if you have a systems focus, and I don't mean that fixing your healthcare is a yellow meta system focus, but like if you have all these systems falling apart around you, you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to focus on something higher level that is all about stability, that assumes a base of stability. Because these things are going to break. You're going to have to drop back down to fix those. So your B prime existential problems are really going to be more about tending to the yellow solutions that should be working already. Because otherwise, like, what is the point of yellows to get these systems working? So if we look at the analog down to purple, okay, your body system is working, you are surviving on a day-to-day basis, and now you start developing interpersonal relationships that become a tribe in order to get longer term safety. So by analogy, B prime should be about looking at these systems that A prime, N prime has built and making sure that they're all functioning together and that they continue to function together, because presumably they were functioning when you got there. B prime will also involve recognition of things that A prime, N prime cannot solve. So yellow can't solve everything. So you start running up against the mysteries of life and start looking towards spirituality and whatnot to come to terms with that. So what this means is that the O prime system, the actual neurological system component of turquoise, is going to be a minimalist system that appears rather passive. Because things are working, you want to keep them working, just like you're surviving, so you want to keep respecting traditions so that you keep surviving. And there are a lot of things that you can't necessarily solve. They're mysteries. So yes, in purple, nature is mysterious. You tell stories of animism. You add that to your mythology and tradition, rather than assuming that you can totally change the world around you. You do have rituals to appease the spirits, and you have spiritual things in turquoise to engage with these mysteries, but it is a relatively passive thing in the sense of you're accepting those. You're accepting those and you are coming to terms with them and finding ways to work with that. So thinking again about getting to the next level, I like to think of it as expansion rather than movement, because people talk about moving to the next level, but really you're adding a new thing. And I thought I'd change this slide. Okay. You're focusing on your current level and you want to remember the existential problems that you need to see and solve. Yes, okay. So what about raising a population to yellow? You need to solve the collective A through F, beige through green problems sufficiently to actually get enough of those people to yellow to get the overall center of gravity of the population to yellow. Without those needs met, people are not going to operate from yellow because beige through green are going to be more suitable to their conditions. So, you know, you can't just try to motivate people to behave in a yellow fashion. according to Gravesian theory, they're just not going to unless they have enough of those solutions in place. So what can people who have achieved yellow, because locally they have solved those solutions for themselves as individuals, what can they do? Can work at a smaller scale today on this, and I don't mean smaller scale in terms of like just your individual person. Obviously, we're looking at systems and meta systems, but work at a stage that doesn't assume that the entire society is already on board with this. So this gets back to the notion of yellow meeting people where they are and understanding that. So you need to be able to go back through and be like, okay, I've got people who are not secure at beige, are not secure at purple. I need to meet all of these different things in order to get everybody up to this yellow level. That's the fundamental task. Raise a population to turquoise, which again is a popular topic often in spiral dynamics. Why would you do that right now? I mean, aside from the fact that it seems really cool, which I'll grant you. But right now, we have a lot of A-prime life conditions, and that calls for active in-prime things. And passive O-prime doesn't have a whole lot of stable systems to work with, to maintain. So if you actually had people in that, why, you know, they might have interesting visions, but they would not necessarily be actively solving those problems. Because being ahead of your life conditions is almost as bad as being behind them, because you are looking at concepts and actions that aren't supported by what's going on around you. So actually, yeah. So in that sense, again, individuals may locally have solved, you know, have enough of a supportive set of systems around them that are working well to move up into a turquoise state, or at least access it occasionally. And then maybe, oh, another thing, I need to really deal with this other thing over here. Okay, we're dropping out of turquoise. I'm going to focus on yellow or lower. But there aren't a whole lot of places in the world where you can actually sustain this, because our world requires more action, not just acceptance of the way things are. So now let's look at a brief comparison of the different things that have been built on top of Graves and how this fits in. So here's a rather busy chart that I had fun making a while back. You can see on the left, we've got Graves, and I stuck with just emphasizing the warm, cool alternation. And then we have Beck and Cohen spiral dynamics, colors, and the same first tier, second tier. And then there's the Ken Wilber altitudes, where he has recolored them in theory for rainbow spectrum chakra stuff, except that they're not actually entirely in spectrum order, so I've never entirely understood that. And tacked on this whole third tier idea, which, as I understand it, is rather loosely derived from Sri Aurobindo's work. I may not have that exactly right, so forgive me. And then there's Hansi Freinacht with political metamodernism, who refers to spiral dynamics as the awkward uncle as of his four-part stage theory. And he has this cultural code, effective value meme concept, and some of these names are similar to names that Wilber uses as well, but some of them are different. And he has this whole death to turquoise thing. So whereas Wilber put more things on top and said, okay, I don't care about this 6 to 6 thing, I'm going to truncate the second tier and tack on 4 levels as a third tier of spirituality. Hansi is like, no, right now we're done at metamodernism, which is the yellow equivalent. And if you're thinking about turquoise, just don't, you're wrong. So the focus of each of these things is somewhat revealing. With the EC theory, there's more of a focus on mechanisms. So it's abstract, which means it is a little like, it's very understandable why spiral dynamics focuses more on examples, because it is very much about people finding application, right? So it's accessible and it's practical, but those examples have some gaps. And I personally think that that shows up a lot with green, because in the time since Graves and in the time since the 90s, we have seen a lot more of how that green dynamic plays out, and it's showing up in other places across the political spectrum and producing very different dynamics than, the kind of hippie liberalism that most of the 1996 book examples come from. So EC theory has this abstract focus, but these are powerful, deep dynamics. And when you're encountering things that don't necessarily seem to fit what's going on, I find that going back to those dynamics can help you work through what's really going on here. How does this apparent behavior fit with the underlying mechanism, even though it doesn't quite fit with the expectations and the examples given? So it's really useful to use both of these in conjunction. And again, spiral dynamics does mention these dynamics. Hey, word dynamics from EC theory. It's more just a question of emphasis, and I find it useful to highlight both perspectives. Looking, I meant to change to not put quite so much text on this slide. Sorry. So Wilbur's altitudes. Wait, hold on. Okay. Well, I meant to do this way. So Wilbur's altitudes are really something else. And I think if you, to the extent that I have really dug through his later writings, which is not all that much, I think that becomes clear. This is why he's relegated spiral dynamics to the values line. There's just certain quadrants. He is trying to, we can debate whether spiral dynamics is a larger thing than Wilbur thinks it is, or whether Wilbur's whole theory is what's necessary. But what he's trying to do with his altitudes is bring in different things, and he has this spiritual focus on that. So he's cut out these cyclic aspects. I know some of them do get mentioned at some point, but they're really not front and center. So he thinks about things in terms of values as opposed to some of the deeper dynamics. Graves wrote on values a lot earlier, but then kind of broadened his focus. Writing these out as a linear rainbow color, that takes things in different directions, and it makes it easier to say, oh, I'm looking at this progression in a certain way, and oh, I see these other things, so I'll tack on this third tier. That makes sense from this linear approach. But if you go back and you look at the cycles and you look at the analogy that is shown by the cycles, well, then what Wilbur's done here doesn't make any sense at all. It kind of goes up and off to a different direction. I personally think that his choice to keep the similar-ish colors was unfortunate. I think that there could have been a lot less confusion, and people could have focused on the value of both the altitudes and the spiral dynamic system, if there wasn't this overlap in colors that causes people to look at them as dialects. Oops, okay. And then I wanted to do the Hanzi section. So Hanzi's focus is on active A prime, N prime, and this is very logical because he is focused on constructing a political system that will bring yellow into existence, or metamodernism, which is roughly equivalent to yellow. So he dismisses turquoise as a distraction. And as I said, if you had a bunch of people at turquoise, they're not going to take that kind of action. So in a way, it is a distraction. And he sees this missing cultural code of turquoise, the larger scale turquoise, as causing some misfires in how people attempt to go about things. And it tends to end up in a lot of cults. And then, yeah, for the goal of meta-modern politics, the turquoise system would be in the way. It's not the one that we need the most right now, because it is not the thing that's going to actively solve the problems. And then I ran out of time while tweaking things and did not have a nice summary slide. But thank you for listening to this very long presentation. I hope it is, at the very least, highlighted the fact that there is something to the way Graves presented these things that can help think about the way the first and second tier relate to each other, and what sort of things need to happen in order to reach the second tier, and when you should think about moving up to something and when you should not. So I believe that is it. And now we can discuss. So I will stop sharing.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Henry. That was really nice.